Hello and welcome back. So last time we made the enemy ships change direction when they hit the boundaries, and now I want to modify the game controller so that it spawns multiple enemies. So now in our game controller script you can see that when the game starts we just instantiate a simple enemy at the random position on minimum x and minimum y, minimum x and maximum x, and for y the minimum y and maximum y. Then we just set the z to be 0 so that our player can indeed hit him, and then we just set his rotation to be the game object rotation. So we just need to figure out a way to call this method whenever we feel like it. So let's go ahead and create a method called maybe spawn enemy. And then here, first thing that I'm going to do is, since we have 3 enemies, I'm going to generate a random number from 0 to 2, and depending on what the number is, we're going to spawn that enemy. So let's go ahead and say integer. Let's call it a random number, and it's going to be a random range between 0 and 2. So it could be 0, 1, or 2, which is 3 numbers for the 3 enemies. And then we can create a switch statement for the random number. This needs to be, of course, in brackets. Okay, so switch random number, and let's say in case it is 0, we're going to want to, let's first of course break this case statement, and if it is 0 we're going to just instantiate the first enemy. So let's go ahead and cut this from the start method. Okay, now for case 1, in case the number that we generated is 1, we will want, we want to instantiate again an enemy, but this time we're just going to create the second enemy, enemy 2. Okay, and let me just, and finally case 2, we're going to instantiate the third enemy. You can of course play around with the random generation however you wish, maybe add in more parameters. The way this is set up, each enemy has the same chance of being spawned, but some enemies are tougher. For example, the enemy 3 is significantly tougher than enemy 2 and enemy 1. Maybe you would want enemy 1 to have a higher spawn chance. We'll talk about that soon. Let me just get the default case, which is just going to instantiate the enemy 1. And of course we need to break this as well. Okay, now we have our spawn enemy method. We can drop it down. And let's go ahead, when the game starts, call spawn enemy. Oops, spawn enemy. And let's get some kind of timer going. So public float spawn timer. And in update, like we usually do, we're going to make sure that we subtract from the spawn timer each frame. And if it's less than or equal to 0, we're going to call the spawn enemy method. But before we do that, we want to, let's get a float called max spawn timer. And when the game starts, I'm just going to set it to the spawn timer, so that now after we spawn an enemy, we can reset the spawn timer, so that we can spawn another enemy. Okay, so now if I go back to Unity, and my game controller will now have a spawn timer, and let's say I set it to 0.4. Now if I run the game, every 0.4 seconds I'm going to get a new enemy, and I'm getting a ton of enemies here spawned. For some reason they're not moving. Let me see what's wrong there. I think they don't have, yeah, the invader tree, these enemies don't have a speed, so let's go ahead and set the speed on their prefab. So the invader one has a speed of 500 and the change timer is 4. So let's set the invader 2 speed to maybe 600 and the change timer to 2. The HP on the first one is 2. Let's set the second one to be 4. And let's set the third invader to be really slow, but have a lot of health, like 5. And set the change timer to maybe, I don't know, 4. Okay, now if I run the game, you can see that we're getting a lot of these enemies. They're spawning randomly, and there's a lot of them coming in. Of course, you can increase the spawn timer, maybe 0.8. Now we will have less enemies, see, much less than previously. And also, I would like to just increase the size of the camera. Okay. So that we can see more of the... But now we will have to increase the boundaries, which isn't too big of a deal. Let's now go back to our script. And you can see here how we had these... How we generated a random number between 0 and 2 and then checked if it's 0, 1 or 2. Well, we can now generate, let's say, from 0 to 100. And we can say in case that random number is less than, let's say, 40. Oops. Interesting. Well, never mind, let's just leave it like this. And let's go ahead and see what our current boundaries are. So let's move the player to the right. So let's say 26, and I guess minus 26, of course. Let's just set that to 26 and minus 26. And of course, set the prefabs of our invaders, set their limits to be as well minus 26 and 26 on the X. There we go. Now I can run the game. And we're getting these enemies, they're spawning. And they're running around. So soon we'll be... and I got killed. Now we will be, in the next lecture, implementing a score, and I also want some of these enemies to shoot. So it's a greater challenge. We'll do that next time. Until then, thank you for watching, and goodbye.